The land had been in her family for generations, a stretch of rich earth that had seen sweat, tears, and the unyielding will of a people determined to hold on to what so many tried to take. To outsiders, it was just dirt, grass, and trees. A parcel on a survey map marked in cold ink. But to Miss Laverne Jackson, it was sacred. Her grandfather had bought it after returning from war, scrimping pennies from a railroad job to purchase the only piece of freedom that could not be stolen. From him, on that soil, they grew food, raised children, and buried their dead beneath oak trees that whispered the stories of their resilience. For decades, developers circled like vultures, promising money and opportunity, flashing contracts thick with fine print. They came with smiles and empty words about progress and community, but Laverne knew better. She had seen too many families sign papers they barely understood, only to watch bulldozers tear through the memories they held dear. So she kept saying no, year after year. She turned down every offer, her refusal a quiet rebellion in a world that had taught her to stay quiet and accept what was given. But progress does not ask for permission. One morning, Laverne woke to the growl of machinery and the sight of trucks rolling onto her land like an invading army. There were men in hard hats and orange vests, maps in hand, pointing and shouting orders as if they owned the place. She stood there in her robe and slippers, disbelief hardening into rage as she realized what had happened, without so much as a phone call or a notice. The homeowners association from a neighboring development had decided to claim her family's legacy for their expansion. 96 homes, they said, were planned for the land her land. At first, Laverne thought it was a mistake, a clerical error that would be sorted out with a conversation. But when she approached the site manager, a man who wouldn't even look her in the eye, she got the first taste of what was to come. "Ma'am," he said curtly, "this property belongs to the association now. You'll need to step aside." His tone carried that cold, dismissive edge that black folks know all too well, an unspoken message that her voice didn't matter, that her history wasn't worth the ink to record. But Laverne wasn't a woman built to crumble. She returned to her house, pulled out the thick folder of documents her grandfather had passed down, and began to plot. She went to the county office, 2 lawyers, to anyone who would listen. What she uncovered made her blood run cold. Through a mix of forged signatures, false filings, and bureaucratic negligence. The HOA had convinced the county to issue permits as if they were the rightful owners. They thought she was just another old woman, too scared or too tired to fight. They were wrong. In public, Laverne kept her composure, but in private, she prayed and planned. She spoke to neighbors, to friends, to anyone who had ever felt the sharp sting of being overlooked and dismissed. Quietly, she built her case, documenting every violation, every trespass, every lie. And all the while, the construction continued concrete poured, frames raised, and houses built where her family once planted corn and collard greens. Months passed, and by the time the HOA's gleaming development stood complete, 96 homes lined in neat rows. Like monuments to arrogance, Laverne was ready. She filed her lawsuit with a calm that belied the storm beneath. Her attorneys, a black-owned firm that understood both the legal system and the deeper stakes of the fight, moved swiftly. The case was airtight. The land had never been sold. The deeds in the HOA's possession were fraudulent. And every home built on that property was, by law, hers. The day the story broke, it lit up every corner of the community. Local news crews camped outside her modest house, and the HOA board scrambled, their carefully curated image of order and control unraveling in the court of public opinion. But Laverne didn't chase cameras or deliver speeches. She simply said, "This land was ours long before they came, and it will be ours long after they're gone." Her words were steady, but there was steel beneath them, a reminder that dignity and justice don't require shouting to be heard. Behind the scenes, the HOA tried everything. They offered settlements, hush money wrapped in legal jargon, desperate. To avoid the public humiliation of a courtroom loss, they claimed ignorance, blamed contractors, even tried to paint Laverne as greedy for demanding what was already hers. but she didn't waver. This isn't just about money, she told her lawyers. It's about respect. It's about every time someone told us we didn't belong. As the trial date approached, tension gripped the town. For some, it was just another legal battle over property lines. But for the black families who had watched their neighborhoods carved up and sold off piece by piece, the debt was something deeper, a chance to see someone like them stand tall and refuse to be erased. In church basements, in barber shops, in corner stores, in front porches, they whispered prayers for Laverne and shared stories of their own quiet losses. And then, the day came when Laverne stepped into that courtroom, her back straight, her head high, wearing her Sunday best not to impress, but to honor the generations that had carried her to that moment. She wasn't just fighting for her land. She was fighting for every ancestor who had worked it, for every child who had played in its fields, for every voice that had been silenced by power and greed. From the moment the judge banged the gavel, it was clear this case was different. The evidence spoke volumes. Original deeds, tax records paid faithfully every year, and a paper trail of forged documents that painted the HOA as not just careless but complicit. The defense tried to spin the narrative, painting the association as victims of a clerical mix-up, but their arguments collapsed under the weight of hard facts. Laverne sat quietly through it all, her expression unreadable, but inside her heart pounded with the memories of every slight, every injustice that had brought her here. When her attorney delivered the closing argument, the room held its breath. "This isn't just about property," he said, his voice steady but full of fire. "This is about a legacy stolen, a history trampled, and the audacity of those who thought they could take what was never theirs. Miss Jackson is not asking for charity. She is demanding justice." The verdict came swiftly.
Ow.
The court ruled that the land had always and unequivocally belonged to Laverne Jackson. Every home built without her consent was now her legal property. The HOA was ordered to pay damages, legal fees, and restitution for every year of unauthorized construction and sale. 96 homes, worth millions of dollars, were now hers. The courtroom erupted, not in chaos, as though everyone understood the magnitude of what had just happened. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and neighbors cheered. But Laverne didn't bask in the spectacle. She simply smiled, small, knowing. Smilan said, "My granddaddy told me, don't ever let them take what we bled for. Today, I kept that promise." Those words would echo far beyond her small town, carried by headlines and hashtags that turned her into a symbol of resilience and righteous defiance. For the HOA, the defeat was devastating. Lawsuits from homeowners who had unknowingly bought homes on stolen land piled up. Board members resigned in disgrace. The once pristine neighborhood now carried the quiet weight of its origins, a reminder that arrogance and entitlement come with a price. But for Laverne, victory wasn't about vengeance. It was about restoration. She set up meetings with families who had bought homes in good faith, offering fair terms to help them stay. Some accepted, others chose to leave. She made sure that whatever came next honored the land and the people connected to it. Her fight had never been about tearing others down. It was about standing her ground, about proving that a black woman with grit and faith could stare down an entire system and win. Her story rippled outward, inspiring communities across the country. In cities and towns where land had been stolen, where history had been bulldozed for profit, people saw in Laverne a blueprint for resistance. She began receiving letters from strangers, young women calling her an inspiration, elders thanking her for reminding them that dignity was still worth fighting for. And yet, in the quiet of her evenings when the cameras were gone and the lawyers had moved on, Laverne would walk her land. She'd run her hands along the rough bark of the old oak trees, stand in the fields where her grandfather once toiled, and whisper a simple prayer of gratitude. She hadn't just defended a piece of property. She had defended the memory and the meaning of a legacy that could never be replaced. Justice, she knew, didn't come often or easily. But when it did, it was powerful enough to shift the ground beneath your feet. For her community, that shift was seismic. They saw in her victory a reminder that silence is not the same as defeat, that dignity is a form of resistance, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the trap laid by those who underestimate you can be the very thing that brings them down. And so, as the sun set on that land, her landmiss Laverne Jackson stood on her porch, the same porch where she had once watched strangers tear through her family's soil. Only now, the view was different. The land was hers, the future was hers, and the legacy that had begun with her grandfather's quiet dream would live on. It's not as a cautionary tale of loss, but as a triumph written in courage, persistence, and unshakable faith.